So this is just my tracing of the skull that several doctors believe is Joseph Smith's skull. Kind of putting it on there. I actually didn't line it up. I made it too big, but either way, it doesn't matter. I'm just looking at orbital bone and cheekbones. And I just do a quick tracing there to see, there is that slant. So not everyone's eyes are perfectly level or their cheekbones. And so Dr. Niles Herrod basically said there was sort of a flat step deformity of that left cheekbone going into the orbital bone. He could see some deformities there, like a healed injury to his left zygoma. You could see it on his skull. And then we don't really have any stories of Hyrum being beat up and breaking his zygoma, but Joseph was beat up really bad by his brother. And so you're seeing this slant in the duplicate oil painting, not in the original at all. Okay, that's something I only see. So right now I've analyzed the details in the painting that I think are amazing and I see in my photo, but I'm just talking about it is that slant going on. And so I could see a slant in my picture and I always wondered, oh, is he just tilting his head? But other features are like his nostrils are level. So there looks like possibly that, artistically speaking, I would just call it a slant, but I'll just go ahead and read what the actual doctor said. So I'm going to pause that again. Okay, so again, a maxillofacial surgeon, he starts talking about the broken bone of the maxilla. So that's this area. So he's a surgeon that works on the bones of the face. So he knows there are different types of fractures. You even just learn as a medical assistant all the different types of breaks and not necessarily what causes it, but yeah, you do. There's so many different names for different types of breaks. And so when he was analyzing this skull, and he analyzed the other one that broke in, there's no way. So he, the human anatomist emeritus at BYU, and then two other doctors in 2009, they're all saying there's no way that this is Hyrum Smith's skull just because there's a big hole in his face right there and the bone's intact. But when he's analyzing the RLDS Hyrum, he says the frontal view, this is the front of view, reveals the skull missing the maxilla. He's a maxillofacial surgeon. So he's talking about bones that he does surgery on, and he's a doctor. Just anterior to the bilateral maxillary first molars, the nasal floor is absent, as well as the septum. The missing segment of the right maxilla appears to be cleanly fractured with evidence of marrow spaces, and the left section is dirt encrusted. The left nasal process bones and piriform aperture of the left lateral nose and process of maxillary appears to be intact. So this is what he's saying. This is totally intact. That's it. When I superimpose the death mass, there's a hole there. There's no broken bone. But this is a clean fracture. Okay, and he goes into detail of that. There appears to be a step deformity to the left zygoma. The zygoma, that's your cheekbone, reviewed by the infraorbital rib, infraorbital bone, okay, orbital rib, is where is the zygomatical frontal suture, however, not evident in the submental view. The bone is intact, as in the buttress of the zygoma. The left zygoma, see, this is our right, but his left. So when you're talking medically, this is the left zygoma. Appears less prominent than the right. Argument could be made that this is a healed zygomatical maxillary fracture. So he sees evidence as a maxillofacial surgeon. He sees evidence that this was broken and part of his eye, this whole thing was just, but it's healed. Okay. The right lateral view, so there's photos of just the right side of his face, not his left too, but just the right side, reveals a skull missing the bilateral temporal sphenoid areas with an intact right zygoma. This is his right zygoma. In zygomatic process of the temporal bone, the absence of the right temporal regions. If you see the profile view, you see there's a big hole right there, and a big hole right there. And you can also see here, doesn't go into this, but you really see on the left side that there's just broken almost all the way up to the frontal bone. Okay, in my opinion. But there's no photos of the left side. They only did his right side. So he's just saying this is totally broken. Okay, anterior to the first removal, crisp fracture lines right here, revealing marrow spaces, which contrast with this hole, these broken bones. He's comparing, okay, with these sphenoid areas which are blunted and lack the crispness. And he explains like this is natural. You can see deteriorating bone that's naturally deteriorating from the earth. And because this is from 1840 to 1828, there should be anything that was broken in 1844 would show evidence of deterioration, is basically what he's saying. Because I'm not reading the whole thing. But argument can be made that the fractured line of the maxilla, like there's not even dirt right there. Okay. Could have been eogenic, like not natural in the process of exhumation. Just how it's broken and that there's no natural deterioration of this bone. He actually thinks that this wasn't broken in 1844 even. Like this wasn't even broken in 1844. Think about that. Okay, but this is buried as Hyrum. There's a big hole right there. Computer images were made of the right lateral skull using the computer techniques, mandible, condyle, and he's just placing things. So it's interesting to note that the left maxilla and nasal process of the left of the maxilla and piriform margin of the nose appear to be intact. It would have been broken, is basically what he's saying, like I've said before. So he says that, another anatomist says that, and then two other actual doctors say in 2009, Joseph Lyon and his brother. They're just like saying, yeah, we're doctors. We know that there's just so many doctors said this. Okay. Computer, anyway, so this is summary. It says evident that from the photograph, provided the exhumation process was performed in less than meticulous fashion, because you can see photos of them digging them out of the ground, where the children and Emma, they all knew that Joseph and Hyrum were buried here because it was right next to her house. It was flooding. They needed to get them out because they didn't want the skulls to go into the Mississippi. Didn't want to lose the skulls. That's why they exhumed them. Okay. Because the water level was rising up to the house. Skull damage was present from what appears to be normal deteriorating process. This looked normal is what he was saying. As well as eogenic process. There's not even dirt right there. This just happened when they were taking them out of the ground. And they were not being careful. And although the argument could be made that RLDS Joseph's skull, not this one, the one that has no facial bones, has sustained mid-facial fractures, is difficult to believe the amount of destruction of the skull was created by blunt trauma, because this is a maxillofacial surgeon. This is a surgeon who does surgery on people that do fall on their face. This is not sloppy work. This is someone who does surgery on the bones of people's face that fall down. He knows what that trauma looks like. Okay, he knows these different types of comminuted fractures, what he believes have caused the skull that was buried as Joseph, but he doesn't believe it's Joseph because I'll keep reading. A reasonable argument would be that these are injuries created by multiple penetrating missiles with resultant comminution of these structures. So it's a type of fracture and subsequent age deterioration. So also just things are breaking and dissolving in their presence of an intact nasal process of the maxilla of RLDS Hyrum. This one gives support to the argument that this, so he's saying this is intact, but not only that, he doesn't think that this was totally, like there could have been a slight fracture right there. He's like, maybe, because this, I don't know, but right there, that was a super clean fracture on that side. So he really doesn't think that this was even broken in 1844. Okay, so that if a bullet was right there, there'd be broken facial bones from a rifle. Further evidence is that the decrease, see, nobody talks about this, of the zygomatic prominence of the cheekbone of the left zygoma, which appears to be evident in the front view of the RLDS Hyrum School. This is consistent with the death mask of Joseph Smith. So he's saying, as he's comparing, looking at the death mask, he can see these deformities in this area, the zygoma, orbital bone. This is a more prominent cheekbone. Although I'm not pulling up the death mask here, I'm just looking at my photo. Just that angle of the face, and so his face is actually quite level. I thought his head was tilted because his eye was so, every time I analyzed it since 2017. But this is, you look at that jawbone, that's very level, but then there is a slant. So if you look at some people just have sort of like a deformity or damage to their face so that maybe their left eye or right eye is lower than the other one. And that's what I see. So speaking artistically, I see a huge slant there, and I see a less prominent cheekbone, and then you see more of a prominent right cheekbone where it's just more solid. But you really do see a left cheekbone that looks different than the right cheekbone. So there's a duplicate oil painting. This painting was based on the daguerreotype and an 1842 painting of Joseph Smith from life that took 4 days. So when you read the written 1810 letter, it becomes a lot more clear because this is the first thing he mentions is this painting. He's telling people, the Salt Lake Tribune, go to Iowa and look at this painting. Then there is an original oil painting and da da da. But I have based, and he doesn't say specifically, and that's where it's confusing. So people assume the original oil painting is what he's talking about. He tends to jump around. If you read his memoirs, he doesn't go in chronological order. He jumps from his timeline, jumps from year to year to year to year, and he just jumps around. And I think that's what happened in the letter in 1910, because he's also much older. But you see that on that skull, like that slant. And so I see the slant in this painting, but not in the original painting at all. And as I talked about in other videos, I could really see this shape of the eyebrow, how this eyebrow almost goes, well, his hair is brushed forward, but then you see more of that temporal part of the face. And but that eyebrow, you don't really see these eyebrow hairs going down right here. You see eyebrow hairs going, you just these little details on his face and eye and this sharp angle, but not going into that. In this one, I'm just showing what I've outlined is just the skull, the cheekbone. You see that this is sort of a higher cheekbone, a little bit lower cheekbone. The zygomatic bone is the cheekbone. And so Dr. Herrod believes that Joseph Smith's skull is that one I first showed you, and that there was healed damage to his left zygoma, and he also mentions the orbital rim of his left eye. So he was beat up so many times that he very well did break facial bones. And then those bones healed. And you see that in the skull. But you do see he is sitting up quite straight, and very few people's faces are symmetrical, or even, just look at a lot of celebrities. I could mention some, but as an artist, I would just look at magazines and I'm like, oh, that person's really beautiful. But then you look at a magazine and you're like, whoa, their one eye is like dramatically lower than the other one. And it just happens. But anyway, so that, again, this was 1996. This was not at all Michael Tracy that analyzed the skulls. It was an $18,000 project around 1996. It took them 18 months. Kent DeGraff, Manal's Herrod, who was a Provo maxillofacial surgeon. So I'm amazed by this information. So I'm just going to plop this on my website. This is Unmasking of the Faces of Hyrum as the Faces of Faith from the Past. Sorry. It's a really good study that was included in Michael Tracy's book, but he didn't write it, but he does do his own analysis by 2009, he does use the same computer system. He's really just regurgitating 1996 stuff, techniques. And I'm not going to talk about the scale daguerreotype and his analysis of that. I just, as an artist, I know he has a flat chin, doesn't have a prominent protruding chin like you see on the death mask, or you see it in my photo, but you don't see it on Skittle Kid's chin. That's one main thing, and you can't see most of the face, actually, if you look at the original scale daguerreotype. So I won't talk about it. But I didn't read his book, so I'm not going to analyze that book, but just have read in full Niles Herrod 1895 analysis of the skull. And it wasn't Michael Tracy, and he wasn't ignoring basics of anatomy. Have a good day.